Ma'am, you will have to come with us to testify in a case of discrimination against a high-ranking foreign guest, the security officer said, addressing a pale woman in a stewardess uniform. But I was just doing my job. I didn't know who he was. Her voice shook, tears streaming down her face, smearing her expensive makeup. At that moment, the modestly dressed black man she had tried to kick out of business class just 2 hours earlier calmly rose from his seat. The security guards formed a perfect line, saluting. "Welcome to Atlanta, Mr. President," said the commander of the honor guard. The flight attendant stared in horror at the man she thought was just another passenger. Ibrahima Traure, president of Burkina Faso, one of Africa's most respected leaders, and she was treating him like a second-class citizen. "Please, there's some kind of mistake," she screamed, but she was already being escorted off the plane under the gaze of dozens of cameras. "America will know what happens when government thinks it can humiliate citizens based on the color of their skin," the governor said calmly, looking straight into the cameras. "The most interesting part is coming. Stay with us to find out how it all ends. In the meantime, like and subscribe to the channel so you don't lose it." The sun was just beginning to rise over Ronald Reagan Airport in Washington. The morning was quiet, peaceful, and cold. Inside the terminal, Ibrahim Traure waited calmly at Gate 27. He was dressed casually in dark blue jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a black hoodie. His 2 bodyguards kept their distance, at the insistence of the president himself. To most people, he looked like any other middle-aged African in casual clothes. But this was no ordinary man. Ibrahim Traure was the president of Burkina Faso, a respected leader of the West African nation. He preferred to travel as discreetly as possible, with minimal security. No big announcements, no fanfare. That way he stayed close to the people. He believed that a leader should be part of his people and stay connected to the citizens, despite his high position. His return from important diplomatic talks in New York, where the UN General Assembly was taking place, was no different from his usual travels. He had concluded important negotiations, discussed investment, sovereignty, and the future of the African continent. Now he was heading to Atlanta to meet with the African diaspora and American businessmen interested in cooperation with Burkina Faso. As he headed toward the gate for a Delta Airlines flight to Atlanta, he greeted one of the airport workers with a friendly greeting. "Good morning. How are you today?" he asked with a warm smile in impeccable English. The worker smiled back, unaware of who was really standing in front of him. That was just how Morning liked it. He walked calmly through the gate, nodded politely to the flight crew, and took his seat in business class. Row 4, seat A, by the window. No one paid much attention. No one cared. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department had already been informed by the Burkina Faso embassy of the president's itinerary, and the appropriate protocol arrangements had been made for his arrival in Atlanta. Although the visit was semi-official, diplomatic protocol required a proper reception for the head of a foreign state. A few rows behind him, people were already starting to whisper. Bradley Thompson, CEO of Silicon Valley's largest tech company, NextGen Technologies, was also headed to Atlanta. He was accustomed to the VIP treatment, red carpets, champagne, first-class service everywhere. But when he arrived at the gate, the airline informed him that business class was already full. Thompson was not pleased. He was not used to hearing the word no. That was when the drama that would soon become a real storm began to quietly but inexorably mount. Bradley Thompson wasn't used to being turned down. He stood at the gate, surrounded by aides and airline staff, tapping his polished shoes impatiently. "Do you even understand who I am?" he said with obvious arrogance. "I am a strategic partner of several African countries. My company is implementing large energy projects across the continent." To him, this meant that the rules did not apply to him. He demanded that they give him a seat in business class immediately. The airline staff fussed, whispered, checked their tablets, but the truth was simple. Business class was full, every seat was taken, and yet Thompson insisted. "Amanda, Mr. Thompson wants a seat in business class, but we are fully booked," the airline representative explained. "We have explained the situation, but he insists on his own. Perhaps one of the passengers would be willing to change for compensation?" "I'll figure it out," Amanda replied with a professional smile. Once inside, Amanda scanned the interior with a keen eye, like a hunter searching for prey. Her gaze paused for a moment when she saw a dark-skinned man in seat 4A. Ibrahim Traure was sitting quietly, scrolling through his phone, unflappable as ever. She looked again. No expensive watch, no assistance, no signs of power or wealth, just a black man in a hoodie. She leaned toward another flight attendant and whispered, "There must be some kind of mistake." She walked up to him, forced a smile and said politely but firmly, "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" she asked Ibrahim after looking around the cabin. Ibrahim calmly handed her the document. Amanda checked the information carefully, then looked at the passenger again. Something in her perception did not match what she saw in the document. In her mind, the passenger in the hoodie did not fit the image of a business-class client. A few moments later, she returned with a false smile, this time more determined. "Shri, sir, I apologize, but we may need to move you to accommodate another passenger. Could you please move to economy class? We will compensate you for the difference in fare." There it was, an insult, quiet but sharp. Ibrahim Traure raised an eyebrow. "And why me?" he asked calmly. "No particular reason, sir," she said, trying to remain calm. "Just a small rearrangement for our guest." "A guest who is more important than me?" he asked, his voice still calm. Amanda didn't answer. She just smiled. The other passengers glanced at her, sensing that something was wrong, but no one said a word. And Ibrahim just leaned back in his seat and said calmly, "No, I will stay where I am." Tensions began to mount, but the real storm was yet to come. Amanda was stunned. No? A man like him telling her no. She wasn't used to that, especially not from an African-American passenger, especially not on her shift. She forced a smile again, but her pride was hurt. "Sir, I insist. This is necessary for operational reasons," she said in a colder tone. But Traore did not flinch. He looked her straight in the eyes. "If the reason is operational, then please explain why they are asking me and not someone else." Amanda hesitated. She hadn't been prepared for such calm resistance. Around them, several business-class passengers had already turned their full attention to what was happening. One man had lowered his newspaper. A woman had stopped typing on her laptop. Something was wrong here, but no one said a word. No one dared intervene. Thompson still hadn't boarded the plane. He was being held at the gate until his seat was sorted out. Amanda quickly walked into the cockpit, whispered something to the captain, then returned with a solution. This time she didn't say a word to Ibrahim. Instead, she approached another black man in business class, then another. She was clearly picking on passengers she didn't think belonged in that class. This was her second mistake. Mouret sat silently and watched. His face was expressionless, but his mind was sharp. He watched, analyzed, listened. Humiliation did not make him angry. It made him more focused. The young African-American man, perhaps in his 30s, looked confused as Amanda now pointed to his seat. "You, sir, we need you to move to economy class." The young man asked, "Why me?" Amanda didn't answer. She just took his boarding pass. At that moment, Ibrahim stood up. "That's enough," he said, his voice calm but heavy with power and authority. "You're making decisions based on skin color, not tickets. That's called discrimination." Amanda turned around, shaking a little. "Sir, I must ask you to sit down. Please don't make a scene." Ibrahim looked her straight in the eye. For a second, she caught her breath. There was something about his gaze, confident, fearless, commanding, but she still didn't know who he really was. To her, he was just another passenger, behaving like a troublemaker. She left again, seething with anger. This was getting out of control for her. "These people," she muttered under her breath, "always cause trouble." Finally, Thompson came on board. Amanda greeted him with particular politeness, offering him a glass of champagne. "We're working on seating arrangements, Mr. Thompson," she said. Meanwhile, Traore sat back down. He fastened his seat belt, his fingers tapping calmly on the armrest. He didn't need to say a word, because soon the whole world would know what had just happened and who exactly had been insulted. Thompson settled into business class like a king returning to his throne. He didn't even glance at Ibrahim Traure as he passed him. Amanda, the flight attendant, made sure he was comfortable, adjusting his seat, handing him warm towels and offering him another glass of champagne. The message was clear. You matter, and that man doesn't. The plane pulled onto the runway and soon took off into the sky, leaving Washington behind but taking with it a moment that would soon shake the entire state and the country. Inside the cabin, everything seemed normal. The passengers were relaxed, the seatbelt signs were out, but beneath the surface, something powerful was building, an invisible storm waiting to break. Ibrahim remained calm. He did not complain, did not raise his voice, did not call anyone, and did not reveal his identity. He simply sat quietly, like a man watching a movie unfold, knowing exactly how it will end. Meanwhile, Amanda avoided looking at him. Something about his presence bothered her, but she pushed it aside. Halfway through the flight, she returned to his seat with a forced smile. "Would you like something to drink, sir?" He looked at her. "There will be enough water." She nodded quickly and left. No apology, no politeness, no respect. Thompson, on the other hand, was treated like a celebrity. Amanda laughed at his jokes, leaned in when he spoke, and asked about his important projects in Georgia. He answered with arrogance, "Georgia is lucky we're here. We bring order to chaos." Amanda nodded in agreement, completely unaware that the man he was insulting was sitting just a few rows away. One woman in the salon, an African-American doctor returning home to Atlanta, noticed all this. She shook her head and whispered to her neighbor, "This is our governor. They don't even know who they are humiliating." Her neighbor's eyes widened in disbelief, but they said nothing. The governor clearly did not want to attract attention, and no one wanted to break the silence. Hours passed. The lights were dimmed, most of the passengers were asleep, but Ibrahim Traure remained awake, looking out the window at the clouds. He was not angry, he was patient, and when the wheels touched down in Atlanta, that patience would go down in history. The plane began its slow descent into Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta. The cabin lights flickered, the captain announced the approach, and the passengers fastened their seatbelts and braced for landing. Amanda walked down the aisle with her tablet, still smiling at Thompson and completely ignoring Ibrahim Traure. From the outside, the view was spectacular. Golden sun over the red Georgia clay, the city below waking up as the plane sank. But what no one inside the plane could see yet was the growing convoy waiting at the airport. Rows of black SUVs, police cars, and the governor's escort lining up on the tarmac. Whispers began to spread inside the cabin, quietly at first. "I see police officers. Are we landing in a war zone?" one foreign passenger asked nervously. No, this is most likely a protocol meeting," the other replied. "Perhaps someone important is arriving?" Thompson grinned. "It must be for me," he chuckled to Amanda. She laughed with him, already preparing to lead him out ahead of the other passengers. She even planned to personally escort him to the terminal. But the plane had barely stopped when the whole atmosphere changed. Outside the window, the passengers saw a diplomatic escort and honor guard lined up. Behind them stood representatives of the State Department, the consul of Burkina Faso in Atlanta, and other officials, all waiting in the blazing sun, maintaining their official bearing. Amanda looked out the window and gasped. "What is this?" she whispered. Thompson stood up proudly, smoothing his suit. "Obviously, it's for me. I told you that I'm involved in big projects here." But before anyone could leave the plane, a diplomatic security officer boarded the plane. His footsteps echoed through the cabin as he walked slowly down the aisle, scanning every face. He stopped at seat 4A and raised his hand to his head in a perfect military salute. "Welcome, Mr. President. Your delegation is awaiting you." The cabin was completely silent. You could hear hearts stopping. Amanda's face contorted, her eyes darting between the officer and the man she had been looking down on the entire flight. Her hands began to shake. Ibrahim Traure stood up slowly, calm, dignified, without saying a word. Thompson took a step back, his mouth slightly open. "Mr. President?" Thompson faltered. "The president of Burkina Faso?" Ibrahim turned and simply nodded at him, not angry, not proud, just a man who no longer needed to be told anything. Another officer entered the salon. "We have instructions," he said coldly, looking at Amanda and Thompson. "You two will come with us immediately." "Wait, what?" Amanda whispered. "Why me?" "You need to testify," the officer replied firmly. "There is reason to believe that you have shown discriminatory attitude towards the head of a foreign state. This is a serious diplomatic incident that requires an official investigation." Amanda tried to laugh nervously, looking around. No, there must have been some mistake. I was just doing my job." But no one listened. Ibrahim stepped off the plane and was immediately greeted by the diplomatic corps, members of his delegation, and an honor guard. Photographers and journalists clicked their cameras. The president of Burkina Faso had arrived for a visit, but this time everyone knew the truth. He had traveled like an ordinary man, and those who had judged him by his appearance would now face the consequences. On board the plane, Amanda and Thompson were escorted to the exit. Passengers watched in disbelief as they left the plane with their heads down, their confidence completely gone. And that was just the beginning. The tarmac was ablaze in the Georgia sun, but all eyes were on the two people being escorted to their cars. Amanda, a Delta Airlines flight attendant, and the high-flying Bradley Thompson, the CEO. Gone were their smug smiles. Gone was the arrogance. In their place was a panic, confusion, and distrust. They were escorted into two separate airport security vehicles. The officers were composed and professional. The tense silence spoke for itself. This was a serious international incident. In the official delegation lounge at the Atlanta airport, President Ibrahim Traure met with journalists. He spoke calmly without anger, but his words carried weight. In a world where we strive for equality and mutual respect, it is unacceptable to judge a person by their appearance or skin color. What happened today is not a personal incident. It is a reflection of a deeper problem that many people face every day, regardless of their status or background. A State Department spokesman issued a statement expressing deep regret over the incident and assuring that the United States attaches great importance to diplomatic relations with Burkina Faso and all African countries. A Delta Airlines spokesman also issued a public apology, promising a full investigation and measures to prevent similar situations in the future. The Burkina Faso embassy in Washington held urgent consultations with the U.S. State Department. Although diplomats from both countries were keen to avoid escalating the incident, President Traore made it clear to his team that he did not want the matter to be hushed up. This is not a question of my personal dignity. This is a question of respect for every person, regardless of their origin or position. When journalists asked President Traore whether this incident would affect relations between the United States and Burkina Faso, he responded with his characteristic wisdom. Great nations are not defined by the mistakes of individuals, but by how they respond to those mistakes. I appreciate the prompt and serious response of the American authorities. It shows their commitment to the values they proclaim. Our partnership is based on mutual respect, and I am sure that this case will only strengthen our understanding of the importance of this principle. President Traure's visit continued as planned. The following day, he met with representatives of the Atlanta business community to discuss economic cooperation between the United States and Burkina Faso. Although the incident on the plane was not an official topic of the meeting, many in attendance made indirect reference to it, expressing their regret and emphasizing the importance of cultural competence in international business. Following consultations between the diplomatic ministries of both countries, an agreement was reached to resolve the incident peacefully. Delta Airlines agreed to review its service protocols and conduct additional training for its staff on cultural diversity. Amanda Clarke and Bradley Thompson publicly apologized to the president of Burkina Faso and expressed their desire to meet him in person to express their regret for what happened. When Thompson and Amanda arrived to meet President Traore at his hotel, both were visibly tense, but the African leader greeted them with unexpected calm and even warmth. "I don't believe in punishment for the sake of punishment," he told them. "I believe in the opportunity for every person to learn and grow. What happened between us was the result of deeply ingrained biases, often unconscious. The real victory will not come from punishing you, but from you becoming aware of those biases and helping others to do the same." At Delta Airlines headquarters in Atlanta, chaos reigned. The CEO called an emergency board meeting. The airline's shares fell 8% in the first day of trading after the incident. The company frantically prepared a crisis response plan, but it was too late. On live national television, an airline spokesman, pale and clearly nervous, read out a statement. "Delta Airlines offers its deepest apologies to Governor Traore and all the people of the state of Georgia for the unacceptable behavior of our employee. We unequivocally condemn any form of discrimination," and at that point, the broadcast was interrupted for an emergency feed from Atlanta, where thousands of people had gathered in front of the state capitol, chanting, "Respect your governor," and "No to racism." Many held homemade signs featuring Ibrahim Traure in his signature hoodie, a new symbol of the fight against discrimination. A few days before returning to Burkina Faso, President Traore met with representatives of Thompson's energy company. To the surprise of many, he confirmed his interest in continuing the cooperation. "We do not abandon a partnership because of a personal incident. That would be unwise and impractical. But we expect our partners to treat our country and our people with the same respect that we treat them with." Mutual respect is the foundation of any successful relationship, whether between people or between countries. A few weeks after President Traore returned to Burkina Faso, Bradley Thompson surprised many by announcing the creation of the Global Understanding Fund with an initial endowment of $5 million. The fund was dedicated to promoting intercultural dialogue and business education for young African leaders. At a press conference, He openly acknowledged that the decision was inspired by his meeting with President Traoré. Sometimes it takes a moment of personal shame and self-reflection to recognize your blind spots. I am grateful to President Traoré for the lesson in leadership and human dignity he taught me. Ibrahim Traure was holding a meeting with rural development advisors at the governor's mansion when he was informed of numerous requests for interviews and comments. His press secretary read out the list: CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, The New York Times, Washington Post. Virtually every national media outlet is asking for an interview. Oprah Winfrey is offering a special. How should we respond? Ibrahim calmly took off his famous black sweatshirt and carefully hung it on the back of the chair. Tell them all that the governor does not comment. I do not use someone else's humiliation for my own PR. Answer that I am busy with important state affairs. The press secretary looked at him in surprise. But sir, this is your moment. You can use this platform to promote important ideas, to fight discrimination. Traore shook his head. The loudest voice is not always the most effective. I will let my actions speak for me. Prepare a press release. Governor Traore thanks you for your support, but in lieu of interviews, asks everyone to focus their attention and resources on programs to combat discrimination in the service sector. The press secretary nodded and was already heading for the door when the governor added, and one more thing. Arrange a meeting with the management of all airlines operating in our state. We must discuss new service standards and anti-discriminatory behavior protocols. This is more important than any interview. By the next morning, the incident had become a national crisis. Anti-racism protests had spread not only to Atlanta, but to other major cities across the country. Thousands of people took to the streets of New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Many of them wore black sweatshirts with the words, "I am Ibrahim," which became a symbol of the movement. Morning TV hosts discussed only one topic: the Delta incident. Psychologists discussed unconscious bias, lawyers analyzed the legal implications, and sociologists spoke of a tipping point in race relations. But the real shock was yet to come. 2 weeks after the incident, Governor Traore announced a new initiative at a press conference at the state capitol. Before assembled reporters, he outlined a plan to create a commission to investigate discrimination in the service industry and proposed legislation aimed at improving corporate practices. He paused, looking straight into the camera. Today, I am introducing the Equal Treatment Act, Traore said from the lectern. This legislation will create a more equitable system of services for all citizens of our state, regardless of their appearance, race, or social status. Across the country, people froze in front of their TVs, smartphones, and computers. No one expected such quick and decisive action. In addition, Traore continued, I have submitted a bill to the state legislature entitled Equal Treatment. This law provides for mandatory training for all service employees and serious liability for companies that allow discriminatory behavior. Fines will reach up to 30% of the annual revenue of the violating company. The market reaction was significant, but not catastrophic. Airline and service sector stocks were moderately lower as investors weighed the potential impact of the new requirements on business. Analysts noted that companies that have already invested in diversity and inclusion programs could gain a competitive advantage. The visit to the Immigration Detention Center was carefully planned by the governor and his team. Despite Traore's desire to explore the situation without official status, all necessary protocols were followed. The center's administration was notified of the visit by a senior state official, although the exact time and details were kept confidential for security reasons. However, there was some confusion upon arrival at the center. The governor, dressed in civilian clothes and with a minimal entourage, faced additional screening at the checkpoint. The staff, who did not immediately recognize him, followed standard security procedures, which led to a slight delay and an awkward situation. The incident, while minor in itself, was another illustration of the problem the governor was raising. Even someone of his stature could be treated differently if his appearance did not match the stereotypical image of a high-ranking official. The event, along with the plane incident, helped draw attention to the broader problem of bias in service systems. After a dispute with Delta Airlines' legal department and NextGen Technologies, an out-of-court settlement was reached. Amanda Clarke and Bradley Thompson publicly apologized for their actions, and the companies committed to significantly improving their equal treatment policies. The agreement included mandatory participation of Amanda and Thompson in educational programs, as well as substantial financial contributions from their companies to the newly created Equal Treatment Fund. Governor Traore, as the aggrieved party, supported the decision, emphasizing that its purpose was never to punish specific individuals, but to change the system that allowed such discrimination to exist. As bailiffs escorted Thompson and Amanda out of the courtroom, reporters shouted questions. One of them pushed forward. "Mr. Thompson, how do you feel now that your stock has collapsed and your reputation is destroyed?" Thompson stopped. His whole appearance was one of defeat. His shoulders slumped, his eyes dull, his suit rumpled. He opened his mouth to reply, but at that moment Governor Traoré appeared behind him. The room instantly fell silent. Ibrahim Traure walked past Thompson without a glance and headed toward the judge. No one expected the governor to show up in person for the hearing. "Your Honor," his voice was as calm as ever, "I would like to make a statement on behalf of the state of Georgia." A few more years passed. Ibrahim Traure was on an official visit to the United States and decided to take a day off for personal relaxation. Dressed in simple clothes and with minimal security, he walked into a small cafe in Washington, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window watching the city go by. To his surprise, the young waitress who brought his order suddenly froze, looking closely at his face. You're president of mourning, right?" she asked quietly. Ibrahim smiled. "Yes, it's me. I hope this doesn't make my coffee more expensive." She laughed. "No, of course not. It's just, I studied your case in an intercultural communication course in college. The professor talked about how you turned a potential international scandal into an opportunity for education and reconciliation. It made a huge impression on me." The president shrugged modestly. "Sometimes the most difficult situations provide us with the best opportunities for growth. The main thing is not to react out of anger or pride." The waitress paused as if collecting her thoughts. "Can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course," the president replied. "Did you ever regret your decision, that you didn't demand a more severe punishment for those people on the plane?" Ibrahim Traure looked thoughtfully out the window, then turned his gaze back to the girl. «Ни на секунду. Посмотрите, что произошло. Аманда Кларк теперь обучает персонал авиакомпании культурной чуткости. Компания Томпсона инвестировала миллионы в образовательные проекты в Африке. Десятки тысяч людей прошли через программы осознанности и борьбы с предубеждениями. Разве могло бы все это случиться, если бы я просто потребовал их наказать? Наверное, нет», — согласилась девушка. «Видите ли», — продолжил Ибрагим, «самая большая ошибка, которую мы совершаем, это полагать, что справедливость всегда должна означать возмездие. Иногда истинная справедливость заключается в том, чтобы создать условия для подлинного изменения. И для этого иногда нужно поступить со своей гордостью и желанием ответного удара». Когда президент Трауре закончил свой кофе и собрался уходить, официантка протянула ему небольшой листок бумаги. «Это от всего нашего коллектива. Мы просто хотели сказать спасибо за ваш урок». На листке было написано: «Спасибо за напоминание о том, что настоящая сила в способности быть милосердным, когда у тебя есть власть наказывать». Ибрагим Трауре улыбнулся, аккуратно сложил записку и положил ее в карман. Затем оставил щедрые чаевые и вышел на улицу. Его телохранители ждали снаружи, держась на почтительном расстоянии. Президент сделал им знак рукой, и они вместе направились по улице. Проходя мимо книжного магазина, Трауре заметил в витрине книгу со своей фотографией на обложке. «Тихая власть. Лидерство через достоинство». Он не стал останавливаться, лишь слегка улыбнулся. Ибрагим Трауре продолжал идти по оживленным улицам Вашингтона, ничем не выделяясь среди других прохожих. Лишь человек в темно-синем пиджаке и простых брюках. Большинство людей проходили мимо, не узнавая его, занятые своими делами и мыслями. И именно в этой анонимности, в этой способности быть просто человеком среди людей заключалась его самая важная сила – тихая власть настоящего лидера. В это время губернатор Ибрагим Трауре продолжал свою работу в тишине губернаторского особняка. Он отказался от всех интервью и публичных выступлений, сосредоточившись на разработке своего нового закона о равном обращении. Его пресс-секретарь в очередной раз вошла в кабинет с ворохом запросов. «Господин губернатор, президент просит о личной встрече. Time готовит обложку с вами. Netflix предлагает снять документальный фильм». Что мне им ответить? Ибрагим поднял глаза от бумаг. «Президенту передайте, что я открыт для конструктивного диалога, но только после того, как будет принят федеральный закон о борьбе с дискриминацией. Остальным вежливый отказ». Он вернулся к работе, но через минуту снова поднял голову. «И еще кое-что. Организуйте мне поездку. Без охраны, без прессы, без официального статуса. «Куда, сэр?» – удивилась пресс-секретарь. «В центр задержания иммигрантов на границе с Техасом. Я хочу лично увидеть условия содержания людей там. Только я, обычная одежда, никто не должен знать, что я губернатор». Пресс-секретарь побледнела. «But, sir, it's too dangerous. After everything that happened», Ibrahim calmly interrupted her. «That's why I have to do it. Power shouldn't hide behind the walls of offices. A real leader should see reality with his own eyes without filters and prepared reports." In the Fulton County Jail, Bradley Thompson sat in a holding cell. His arrogance was gone. In front of him was a copy of the Wall Street Journal with the headline, "Next Gen in Free Fall. Company loses 40% of market value." The guard knocked on the bars. "Thompson, you have a visitor." Bradley looked up and saw his lawyer. "What's the news? When will they let me out of here?" The lawyer sat down opposite. "I posted bail. You'll be out in an hour. But the news isn't good. The board voted to suspend you permanently, not temporarily. They're demanding that you sell all your shares in the company." Thompson jumped up. "What? They can't just fire me. I created this company. The board of directors has the right to temporarily remove the CEO in the event of serious risk to the company's reputation," the lawyer explained calmly. "Your name is now associated with a scandal, and this affects the company's shares. But we are talking about millions of dollars, about the work of my life." The lawyer shrugged. "You have a choice. You can fight, and then they will use everything they have against you. Or you can accept their terms and leave with a part of the fortune." Thompson collapsed onto the bench, covering his face with his hands. "It's all because of that darn governor. If I knew who he was." "That's the whole problem." The lawyer shook his head. "You shouldn't have treated anyone like that, no matter their status. That's what Traoré is trying to get across to everyone." Across town, Amanda Clarke sat in her sister's small apartment. Her phone kept ringing. Journalists, activists, even former colleagues, hungry for the scoop. She turned it off and just sat there, staring out the window. "What am I going to do now?" she asked quietly. "I'm fired. My name is all over the news. I'll never be able to get a job again." The sister sat down next to her and took her hand. "You can start all over again. Maybe this is a chance to think about your prejudices, about how you look at the world." Amanda smiled bitterly. "I'm not a racist. I was just doing my job." "Would you really ask a white passenger in a suit to move?" the nurse asked quietly. "Or just a black man in a hoodie?" Amanda fell silent, unable to find an answer. That evening, the court ruled on Amanda Clarke and Bradley Thompson. Following Governor Traoré's suggestion, the judge ordered them to perform 200 hours of community service and participate in an educational program. They were also required to donate to an anti-discrimination fund. As Thompson walked out of the courthouse, he was suddenly confronted by Governor Traoré, wearing his signature black sweatshirt. "Mr. Governor," Thompson hesitated, not knowing what to say. Ibrahim extended his hand to him. "Mr. Thompson, I hope that these events will be not the end for you, but the beginning of a new understanding of equality and respect for each person." Thompson shook the outstretched hand hesitantly. I don't know what to say. You could have destroyed me completely, but instead, destruction does not solve the problem." The governor continued to speak calmly, but his eyes showed unshakable confidence. "Only understanding and change. I do not expect apologies from you, but action. Show the world that even the most privileged can change." After Thompson left, an elderly African-American woman approached the governor, her face wet with tears. "Mr. Governor, my son, he was thrown out of a restaurant last year. No one believed that he was treated that way because of the color of his skin. But now, after what you did, maybe people will start to believe us." Ibrahim hugged the woman. "They will believe. And not only believe, they will act, I promise you." Over the next 48 hours, the Delta affair, as it was dubbed in the press, became a turning point in American history. 30 state legislatures began drafting their own versions of the Equal Treatment Act. Congress approved a preliminary version of a federal anti-discrimination law. The nation's largest corporations publicly announced new diversity and inclusion programs. But the real shock was yet to come for America. At 5 p.m., all the TV stations interrupted their programming for breaking news. A CNN reporter appeared on the screen, standing outside an immigration detention center on the Texas border. "We have received shocking information. Georgia Governor Ibrahim Traure, dressed in ordinary clothes, tried to get into the immigration detention center to personally see the conditions of detention. According to our information, there was a misunderstanding during the document check. The cameras showed the center building surrounded by dozens of police cars and helicopters. According to unconfirmed information, the center's employees did not recognize the governor in his everyday clothes. Only after additional verification was his identity established. Across the country, people froze in front of their screens in shock. If even the governor of the state, whose face has been on every news channel in recent days, could face suspicion because of his appearance, what can we say about ordinary citizens? A border service representative appeared on air, looking extremely agitated. We offer our deepest apologies to Governor Traoré. There was an unfortunate misunderstanding. The center's staff acted according to security protocol. He was interrupted by a shout from the crowd of reporters. Does the security protocol include special attention to visitors of a certain appearance? The representative turned pale. We are conducting an internal investigation, and at that moment, the doors of the center opened and Ibrahim Traure came out. His face was tired and there was a bruise on his arm, but he walked upright and with dignity. Two officers walked next to him, their faces clearly worried. The reporters rushed forward. Mr. Governor, what happened? Are you going to sue? How were you detained? Ibrahim raised his hand, calling for silence. I came here not as a governor, but as an ordinary citizen concerned about the conditions in which people are being held. I will not comment on the treatment I received. It speaks for itself. He pointed to the detention center. But I saw what I wanted to see. People are kept in conditions unworthy of a human being. Children are separated from their parents. The sick do not receive proper medical care. His voice, always calm, now sounded with even greater force. This is not a question of immigration policy or party preferences. This is a question of humanity. Treating people with dignity should be an absolute priority in any situation. Cameras showed a close-up of his tired but determined face, an image that would soon appear on the front pages of many newspapers. Tomorrow I am sending a delegation from the state of Georgia to conduct a full inspection of this center. I invite representatives from all states to join us. We must see the truth with our own eyes and not through the filters of reports and statistics. An emergency meeting with border officials was held at the White House. According to sources, the tone of the conversation was serious. This incident must be thoroughly investigated, the president said. Any citizen, and especially an elected official, deserves respectful treatment when interacting with federal services. The head of the border service looked like he was about to have a stroke. Mr. President, the staff did not recognize him. He was in ordinary clothes without security, and that justifies the inappropriate treatment? The president turned to the attorney general. I want a thorough investigation of this incident and an explanation of all the circumstances. At this time, spontaneous demonstrations began all over the country. People took to the streets with signs saying, if they can treat the governor like this, what are they doing to us? And equal treatment is not just words. In Atlanta, the largest demonstration in state history, between 100,000 and 200,000 people, according to various estimates, gathered in front of the state capitol building. People chanted the governor's name and demanded systemic change. Late in the evening, Ibrahim Traure returned to Atlanta. Despite the late hour, a huge crowd met him at the airport. People stood silently with homemade signs and photos of the governor. When he appeared at the exit of the terminal, the crowd parted, forming a living corridor. Ibrahim walked among the people, not saying a word, only nodding in gratitude. His tired face and the abrasion on his hand spoke for themselves. An older white man stepped forward and handed him his jacket. Sir, you may wear this, so that no one else will dare to insult you like that. Ibrahim shook his head with a smile. Thanks, but no, I prefer people to see me as I am, not as they want to see me. He turned to the crowd. What happened to me is just a moment in my life, but for many it is a daily reality, and that is what we must change. The crowd parted and a young Latin American woman walked through them with a child in her arms. Mr. Governor, my husband is now in the center you visited. He is not a criminal. He was just looking for a better life for us. Please help him. Ibrahim took the woman by the hand. I promise I will do everything in my power, not only for your husband, but for everyone who finds themselves in this situation. He turned to everyone gathered. This is not a one-day campaign. This is not a social media trend that will disappear in a week. This is the beginning of real change. And I ask each of you to be a part of this change. People started chanting his name, but he raised his hand again. Don't glorify me. Glorify the idea of equality and dignity for all. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter who sits in the governor's chair. What matters is that every person's voice is heard. The next morning, the world was talking about two events: Governor Traure's arrest downtown and his subsequent speech at the Atlanta airport. But the real bombshell was yet to come. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Bradley Thompson's face appeared on all the major TV networks. The former CEO of Next Gen Technologies, the man who had become a symbol of corporate arrogance, looked very different, without his usual polish and self-confidence. "I speak to all Americans," he began. "A few days ago, I was the man who thought his status and money entitled him to special treatment. The man who saw no problem in others giving him a place to sit because of his status." He paused, clearly struggling with his emotions. "The events of the last few days, and especially what happened to Governor Traore in the detention center, opened my eyes. I saw the system I was part of, a system that evaluates people not by their human dignity, but by their appearance, status, or wealth. Millions of Americans glued to their screens couldn't believe their ears. The country's most arrogant businessman was talking about equality and dignity. Today, I am announcing the creation of the Equal Dignity Fund with an initial contribution of $10 million from my personal funds. This fund will finance programs to combat discrimination, support victims of unequal treatment, and promote inclusivity in corporate culture." The camera showed the journalists present in the studio, whose faces expressed extreme surprise. "In addition, I am personally going to the same immigration detention center that Governor Traore visited. Not as a VIP guest, but as a volunteer. I want to see with my own eyes the conditions in which people are being held and do everything possible to improve them." Thompson concluded by looking directly into the camera. "Mr. Governor, if you are watching this, I am deeply grateful to you. Not for showing me mercy in court, but for opening my eyes. Sometimes a person has to fall very low to finally see the truth." As soon as the broadcast ended, the phones of every newsroom literally exploded. No one expected such a turn of events. The man who just a few days ago was a symbol of privilege and arrogance suddenly became an ally in the fight for equality. In the governor's mansion, Ibrahim Traure watched the broadcast, surrounded by his advisors. When Thompson finished speaking, the room fell silent. "Is he sincere?" the governor's chief of staff finally asked. "Or is this just a PR stunt to restore his reputation?" Ibrahim thoughtfully rubbed the abrasion on his hand. "You know what the difference is between a PR stunt and genuine remorse? In the subsequent actions. Let's see what he does, not what he says." He turned to his assistant. "Contact his office. I want to meet him in person, without cameras and reporters. Maybe we can find a way to work together." Meanwhile, in another part of Atlanta, Amanda Clarke, a suspended Delta flight attendant, watched the same broadcast. Her eyes were wet. If even Thompson, a man with far more resources and influence, could admit his mistakes, maybe she could make a difference too. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for Dialogues on Race, an organization that provides educational workshops on racial equality. Nuts. "Hello, my name is Amanda Clarke. Yes, I am the flight attendant from the news. I was wondering if I could take part in your educational programs." The coordinator on the other end of the line was surprised. "Miss Clarke? Our organization deals with—" "I know what you do," Amanda said softly. "That's why I'm calling. I want to better understand my biases and learn to recognize them." By the evening of that same day, the news of Thompson's decision to create a $1 million anti-discrimination fund was the talk of the country. But an even bigger sensation was the news that Governor Traore and Bradley Thompson were heading to the border together to inspect an immigration detention center. A photo of the two of them boarding a helicopter, the governor with a cut on his arm in his signature black sweatshirt and the former CEO in a plain white shirt with no tie, went viral within minutes. But the real surprise was what happened after they arrived at the border. Instead of an official visit with protocol events, they spent the entire day talking to detainees, checking the conditions of detention, recording violations. By evening, Governor Traore held an impromptu press conference right at the gates of the center. "What we saw today is unworthy of America. People are being held in conditions that violate not only our laws, but also the basic principles of humanity." Thompson stood next to him, nodding in agreement. "We cannot ignore this. Regardless of our political views, we must recognize that this is not the way to treat people." The governor continued. "That's why Mr. Thompson and I have decided to cooperate. The state of Georgia will send a formal request to the Department of Homeland Security to inspect the conditions of detention. and the Equal Dignity Foundation will provide legal assistance to the detained immigrants. Journalists were shocked by this unexpected alliance. Mr. Governor, just a week ago, Mr. Thompson was guilty of discrimination against you. How can you work with him now? Traore looked at Thompson with a slight smile. Do you know what separates a great man from a merely privileged one? The ability to admit his mistakes and change. Mr. Thompson has shown that he is capable of this. And if a former adversary can become an ally in the fight for justice, it only strengthens our cause. Thompson added, I was wrong, not only in that specific incident on the plane, but in my general attitude towards people. Governor Traore gave me a chance not just to avoid punishment, but to become a better person. And I intend to justify that trust. That evening, a new hashtag appeared on social media. Nearer your change is possible. Under it, people shared stories about how they had reconsidered their views, overcome prejudices, and learned to see the value of each person. America was starting to change, and it was all because of one man who wasn't afraid to be himself, even if it meant facing prejudice head-on. 3 months have passed since the Delta incident. Governor Mourner's Equal Treatment Act was introduced in the Georgia legislature and received bipartisan support, a rarity in such a polarized state. Several other states have expressed interest in drafting similar bills, and preliminary discussions have begun in the U.S. Congress about a possible federal version. Delta Airlines has completely overhauled its customer service policies. Amanda Clarke, to the surprise of many, was not only not ostracized, but became a vital part of the airline's education program. She regularly spoke to employees about her experiences and how unconscious bias can influence the behavior of even those who don't consider themselves racist. Bradley Thompson, former CEO of NextGen Technologies, has kept his word. His Equal Dignity Foundation has funded hundreds of projects across the country, from legal aid for victims of discrimination to educational programs in schools. He has personally visited universities and corporations, sharing his journey from arrogance to understanding. Immigration detention centers have begun to undergo inspections and gradual improvements following a formal request from the state of Georgia and the intervention of the Thompson Foundation. New standards for detention have been proposed, including measures to keep families together and improve health care. But important changes were also beginning to occur in society. Surveys showed growing awareness of discrimination. People were becoming more attentive to these issues and more willing to intervene if they witnessed unequal treatment. Ibrahim Traure continued to lead the state in his own unique style. He still preferred to walk without security, to talk to ordinary people, to see problems with his own eyes and not through the filter of reports. One Sunday morning, he sat in a small cafe in downtown Atlanta, unrecognizable in his signature black sweatshirt, scrolling through the news on his tablet. It was here, among ordinary people, that he felt at home. A young waitress approached his table. "More coffee, sir?" He looked up and smiled. "Yes, please," she began pouring coffee, then suddenly froze, looking into his face. You... Ibrahim put his finger to his lips. "Let's keep this between us." The girl nodded, her eyes sparkling. "You know, I saw you on TV. What you did, it changed my life. I'm from Venezuela, and my brother was in that detention center. Now he's home with us thanks to you." The governor shook his head. "Not because of me, because we all decided together that this couldn't go on any longer." She smiled. "But someone had to make the first move, and that someone was you." Ibrahim looked thoughtfully out the window at the busy Atlanta street. People were hurrying about their business. Different races, ages, social statuses. They did not notice the governor sitting among them. And that was exactly what he wanted. Not recognition, not fame, not honor, but the simple opportunity to be part of a society that treats everyone with equal respect and dignity. "You know," he said quietly to the waitress, "real power isn't getting people to do things. Real power is inspiring them to want to do them." She nodded, still not believing that she was talking to the state governor. "Will you run for president?" "Everyone is talking about it." Ibrahim smiled. "I will do what I think is right, today, tomorrow, and always. And in what position, that is secondary." He finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and walked out into the street. No one turned around. No one recognized him. The man in the black sweatshirt, who had changed the country, was simply walking among the people he served, and it was the quietest and most powerful power of all possible.